The Jets' defensive line is very talented, but there's a breakout candidate who could take the unit to the next level. We'll talk about who it is and more on the Jets' defense today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, June 7th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Well, today we're going to continue our discussion with my friend MacGregor Wells, who writes with me at GangGreenNation.com. On yesterday's show, we talked about some of the moves the Jets made on offense during the course of the offseason. Now let's turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball. We'll also get into breakout player predictions. We'll talk about coaching, all that ahead on today's show with my friend MacGregor Wells. All right, talking about the defensive side of the ball, you've discussed how, you weren't that thrilled with what they did at the defensive end spot. They let Bryce Huff go, which anybody who listens to the show knows I was not a fan of that myself. They make a trade for Hassan Reddick. They trade John Franklin Myers, Will McDonald, stepping up, getting more snaps. The one consistent on this defensive end group will be Jermaine Johnson this year. And the way I've described it, my take on this is that it's different. I think it still should be, or hopefully will be, as good. But yeah, they have mixed some things up. What do you think about this defensive end spot?
I think it's going to be worse. But the defensive line is going to be worse. I'm not so sure the defensive end position is going to be worse. I think the defensive end position might be a little bit better because I think Will McDonald has the potential to be a double-digit sack guy this year. If you look at what he did in the last 5 games of the year, which is really the only games he got any kind of substantial playing time, he got 2.5 sacks. He got, he got 7 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. I mean, this guy was, when you prorate that, he got 71 snaps in that time. Bryce Huff got 145, and Will McDonald in the same time. Will McDonald was less than half the snaps that Huff had in that time, and more than half of the production on every statistical category. Now, Huff was also playing some running downs that McDonald wasn't, so there's some wiggle room there. But I don't know. I think Will McDonald has a chance to give you a lot of what Huff did last year, and I think he's being undersold. So in that way, the Jets have a potential to be better. But losing JFM, John Franklin Myers, is a bigger loss than I think people are giving him credit for. He was a really good player. He wasn't a Pro Bowl guy. He wasn't an all-pro guy, but he was a very solid player. He gave you both in the running game and the passing game. He gave you above average play. And I think that's going to be a loss that there's not so easy to figure out where the direct replacement of John Franklin Myers is going to come from on the Jets, other than maybe now I can't remember his name. It doesn't matter. Bottom line is I don't see anybody in the Jets. Maybe the undrafted rookies they have coming in will get some of that playing time, but I don't know. There doesn't seem to be anybody that directly replaces John Franklin Myers on that line.
Yeah, I've said this a lot through the years, that I thought he was actually a really important player on the defensive line because he was like 290 pounds and he plays defensive end in a 4-man alignment. And normally guys who are his size play inside, and it gave them some like extra beef up front at the defensive end spot. So essentially you're playing with like three guys with the weight of a defensive tackle. And I think that's important because if you look at the way this defense is constructed, the back 7, they really emphasize speed. And that means that, you're not playing with, if you're emphasizing speed, that means you're playing with smaller guys who aren't really going to be as adept at shedding blocks. And like one of the things that like really stood out to me when I was watching a little bit of the Jets film on defense over the last couple of weeks is that I felt like there were almost like 2 different defensive end positions. There was like the Huff role, which I guess previously was held by Carl Lawson, who was essentially like kind of like the rush guy, where he was just firing up the field. Whereas JFM was more a guy who his first job was to secure the gaps. His first job was to make sure he was eating up space. And then after that, he collapsed the pocket. He went into his bull rush. And there really aren't a lot of guys who can do that. There are guys who can eat up space, but there aren't a lot of guys who have his bull rush. So, I think Clemens might have been the guy you were thinking of, who, because one of the things like I was watching is that Clemens was the guy who was subbing in for JFM. So there are almost two different defensive end positions for the Jets. There's like the rush guy, and then there's like the secure the gap, play the run, and then collapse the pocket guy. And that makes me wonder, like maybe the Jets are designing this defensive front a little bit differently this year, because Saleh came from Seattle originally, way back when, before San Francisco, before Jacksonville. He worked with Pete Carroll in Seattle. I know that during the time Saleh worked in Seattle, the Seahawks kind of did something similar where they played like a nose tackle at defensive end, and then they kind of changed things after they brought in Michael Bennett. So I don't know. I think like the assignments are going to change, and I do worry a little bit about the run defense without JFM in there. But I think this is the moves that they made are a sign that like something's going to be different about this defensive line this year.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're going more towards an all-out pass rush, trying to get to the quarterback, and maybe shooting the gaps to get more tackles for loss. So quickness ahead of size. I think you're going to find that. I think that hurts them in the running game. How much do they pick up putting pressure on the quarterback as opposed to loss in the running game? That's sort of the big thing. But the interior line took some hits too, and that's those hits are going to be a problem as well, because other than Quinnen Williams now, you really don't have anybody who rushes the passer all that well on the interior. So the ability to get to the quarterback, I think, has been compromised on the interior line, where they lost Quentin Jefferson. So I don't know. And also the guys they brought in, Javon Kinlaw, I mean, it's just he just really hasn't had any production over the years. So maybe the Jets, who have been good at developing interior defensive linemen, maybe they can get something out of them others couldn't. But San Francisco's pretty good at that too, and they didn't seem to be able to get much out of them. So I don't know. I'm skeptical about the defensive line as a whole, how this whole thing is going to piece together, and if it's actually going to be. I think it's going to be worse than it was in years past, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think Jefferson was as big of a loss. This is me. I don't think Jefferson was as big of a loss. So my take on this is that anything happens to Quinnen Williams, we got problems. But I mean, I think about 2 years ago, and Shelton Rankins looked really good next to Quinnen Williams. And then last year, Quentin Jefferson, had a pretty good year next to Quinnen Williams. I mean, was Quentin Jefferson really that great of a player before he came to the Jets? I mean, he was okay. He was fine, and a quality NFL player. I guess better than Kinlaw. But I feel like the Jets have kind of just they're kind of operating under the theory, and I don't think it's a terrible theory, that Quinnen Williams just occupies everybody's attention. And I think I saw some stat on ESPN that he was double teamed 70% of the time last year, which I think may have been the reason his production on paper wasn't as good as it was in 2022, even though I think he was every bit as dominant in 2023. And I think the mindset is essentially, next to Quinnen Williams, you're going to get favorable matchups. And you think about the guys the Jets have a defensive end. I understand the concern about defensive tackle. And, there's after Quinnen Williams, if you take Quinnen Williams off this group, then you may have the worst defensive tackle group in the league. But I'm not that worried about it, because the guy's going to be the fourth best defensive tackle on the team because of Quinnen Williams, his fourth best defensive lineman on the field. You have two good defensive ends on every snap. You'll have Quinnen Williams in the middle. So you're talking about your fourth best defensive lineman. The other thing is, Quinnen Williams, again, just takes up so much attention that you're going to get more favorable assignments. So my issue with the giving him $7 million guaranteed really did not make a lot of sense, but I'm not overly concerned with that. And yeah, I agree with you. And like I said to myself, I am worried about this run defense, but it's also true that if you can get to the passer or shut down the run, I mean, in today's NFL, I'm going to choose getting to the passer every time. So that's my argument in favor of, kind of what the Jets are doing out there.
No, that's absolutely right about, the passing game is what matters far more than it is hard to put together 12, 15 play drives with a running game. So, if you're going to choose shutting down the passer more than shutting down the run game. So we'll see how it all works. I'm not sure that they improved shutting down the passer, and I think they took a step back and shutting down the run. That's my concern.
Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your ride or die, eBay Motors will make sure you're right. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Well, I think the question with the passer, the question with rushing the passer, it really comes down to the Bryce Huff, Reddick. It's essentially a trade. People have really gotten mad at me for saying it was a trade. Essentially was a trade. I mean, one guy wants one. I mean, essentially the Jets valued Reddick more than they valued Huff, and the Eagles valued Huff more than they valued Reddick. So they swapped. It might as well have been the trade. I'm not going to listen to anybody who says it wasn't. It was essentially a trade. But
yeah, but the Jets also gave a 3rd-round pick. That's a problem.
Yeah. Let's ignore that. It's one of those things where, like, I would typically be on the side of take the young ascending player versus the guy who just turned, the guy who's like in the 30 range. So I wanted to keep Huff. I was very vocal about that. Reddick has been one of the top pass rushers in the league the last 4 years, and if he can maintain that level, it's a possibility the Jets could end up with a better pass rush. And I think the other question is, with Huff, I'm of the impression he's going to still be very productive. I mean, I think he's a guy who's going to be, an 8 to 12 sack guy probably the next 3 to 4 years. I think, his track record shows that. People say, he wouldn't produce that much. I would say the Jets completely misevaluated him his entire time here. I mean, the Jets signed Jacob Martin to replace him as the situational pass rusher in 2022. And they essentially had to trade Martin to Denver because Huff outplayed him. But look, there's always a question when you go to a new team. There's a question about when you take on a full-time role, really, for the first. I mean, I guess he kind of became a full-time player part of last season, but he's never been a full-time player for an entire season. So I think there's an open question there. I mean, I think it conceivably could be a better pass rush. I think, you mentioned, Will McDonald shows that he can get after the quarterback. I actually think there is a space for this pass rush to be better. I think it's fair to ask, will that happen? And that I don't know. But I think it could go either way.
I think it can get better. I think the key to it being better is Will McDonald. And I'm pretty optimistic. I think people are pretty down on Will McDonald, but I think Will McDonald can be a big-time pass rusher. We'll see. But I saw some things at the end of the past year that suggest that he's being underestimated by a lot of people, I think. We'll see.
Well, I think a lot of it was just like he was such an unexpected pick and nobody wanted to draft a defensive. I think people are like letting their feelings on drafting a defensive end kind of seep into their evaluation on McDonald.
The one thing I'm a little concerned with is he's very small. And one of the things that teams tend to do with that situation is, well, we need to bulk him up so he can be a little bit better in the run game. And then he loses his quickness, So I'm hoping the Jets don't take the position. Let's put 15 pounds on him, and then he'll be exactly the same as Bryce Huff. But he won't be. He'll be Will McDonald with 50 more pounds on him, and that may not be a good thing. We'll see. I'm concerned about that, but I think as a pass rusher, he's excellent. I think he is. And he's just so small sample size, we just don't know for sure. But I saw some things at the end of the year. I thought, wow, that's a good player. We'll see.
Let me ask you about Quincy Williams. Do you think that was a career year, or do you think that was the first step in him ascending into being an elite linebacker for a long time?
It's hard to imagine him going back. He changed things. He was not so reckless. He seemed to actually learn. You don't see as many players develop as people always talk about. Guys come to the league, and oftentimes they're pretty much the same player they were when they started. He was a different player last year, so it's hard for me to say, no, he's going to revert to who he was before, because I think there was a real progress, as opposed to, well, it was a kind of a fluky year. He was doing the same things, but they were more successful just because random chance. Now, I think that's the start of a real strong career from this guy. What do you think?
I agree. I think if I'm Quincy Williams' agent, I'm so upset that he had that year last year instead of 2022, because you look at it, the Jets have like one of the best contracts. I was going to say it's one of the best linebacker contracts in the league. that's just one of the best contracts in the league right now, because I mean, they're paying him like even I thought when they gave him the contract, like it was fine for like what he was. I didn't think it was like a huge overpay, but it was just like, okay, that deal's, it's not terrible, it's not great, but now it's a great deal because it's like you said. I mean, he was a guy who, reckless is the right word. I equated him to the guy in baseball who, hits 40 home runs but strikes out 200 times, or maybe he wasn't hitting 40 home runs, but he was like one of those 3 outcome guys in baseball where it was either a home run, a walk, or a strikeout, because there are a lot of times where you saw him make big plays. And I felt like the first 2 years, maybe he got a little bit too much love in the fan base, because everybody notices when you like shoot the gap and you tackle a guy for a 3-yard loss, whereas you don't really notice the guy who, like the linebacker who over pursues and fills the wrong gap and leaves the gap open and like allows a 20-yard run. And Quincy like did both of those the first 2 years, but he just figured out a way to channel it. And I think you said it perfectly, where we always talk about, oh, these guys will develop, these guys have time. And most of the time it doesn't happen. Most of the time, I think, especially through like after the first year or two, you kind of are who you are. And yeah, I can't dispute what you said. I mean, he was just different. So I'm optimistic about Quincy. I hope he's going to become my favorite player on the team, just because I love the way he played last year. I love the 2023 Quincy Williams. So, and what an unbelievable story. They got him off waivers. He's the brother of the best player on the team, and developing like this. I mean, it's really something special.
It's fun to watch, and you got to give credit to the Jets coaching staff, because they kept talking about him as this guy is a future Pro Bowler. And come on, he was a future Pro Bowler, and this guy is good now. So give credits to where credit's due. The Jets saw something in him that I didn't see, and so great. They were right, and I was wrong.
I actually feel like he made Mosley better, because with Quincy like showing so much range last year, Mosley, I felt like, did not have to take on as many tough assignments. He could kind of stay at home. He's better against the run. He's better, in playing in the box. He plays an important role. He's kind of like the coach on the field, making sure everybody gets lined up correctly. So it was funny because Mosley was the team MVP in 2021. I was like, I guess he was okay. But I mean, in 2021, it was really hard to pick a team MVP just because there weren't that many great performances. 2022, he's a second team All Pro and he makes the Pro Bowl. I'm like, really? Like, I mean, I thought it was okay. Again, I didn't think he was that good. Last year, I thought he was great. And I think part of it was like Quincy allowed him to focus on the things he does well. He gets no accolades.
Yeah, absolutely. Quincy was really good in pass coverage too last year, which I was shocked. He was really impressive. That was an impressive year, and I think he's going to continue to be pretty much that player from going forward. That's my guess.
Yeah, this time last year we were talking about linebacker being a concern on the team, and he ended up having a first team All Pro guy there. So
yeah,
an outstanding year for Quincy Williams.
Yeah.
Talking about, I don't know if there's much to talk about at corner other than the Jets are really, really good there. Sauce Gardner. I've never said this about a Jets player through 2 years, and I'll probably never say it again about a Jets player through 2 years, but I'm convinced he's going to end up in the Hall of Fame, because I mean, he's just been that dominant. He's been that good. DJ Reed's an outstanding number 2 corner. Michael Carter II, really solid in the slot. I mean, I think more or less they're set at corner this year. I guess the question becomes, what do you do next year, because 2 of those 3 guys are about to hit free agency. You have Reed's in the final year of his contract, and Carter entering the final year of his rookie deal. So I guess the questions at corner are more a year down the line.
Yeah, to me, the Jets have the best threesome in the league at cornerback. These guys are unbelievably good, and I agree with it. Unless Sauce Gardner suffers some career-ending injury, or if he just loses interest in performing after he gets paid, those are the only 2 things keeping him out of the Hall of Fame. This guy is unbelievable. But next year, 2 of the 3 will be unrestricted free agents, and Sauce will be eligible for a contract extension for the first time. And I don't see him saying, well, I'll wait. I don't think he's going to wait. So they're going to have to pay all 3 or lose 1 or more of them. Now, the conventional wisdom is you can't pay all 3. But I don't know if that's true. These wide receivers are getting $30 million a year now, and the guys who cover them are not getting that amount. Now, maybe it's a good investment to invest in 3 guys who can actually shut down any wide receivers that you throw at them. So, I mean, I don't mean shut down the way Revis did in 2009. That's not really possible anymore, but shut down in terms of today's NFL. So, maybe it's a good a way to spend your money to spend that way, because you're spending a lot less than you would spending on all these great wide receivers. And yet it's sort of the flip side of the coin. Just a thought.
No, that's interesting. Look, I'm happy if Sauce signs the extension after the season, because one thing that drives me crazy about the Jets is they always procrastinate on these extensions with their good players. And like sometimes it eventually gets done, but there's more heartburn than there should be, like with Quinn and Williams. And then sometimes the relationships turn. How many times does a relationship with a good Jets player turn sour with the team and they ends up getting traded? It's actually one of the things that drives me crazy about the Jets is they're never proactive about this stuff. So I actually hope that they get this deal done with Sauce after the season so we can avoid all that. It's a really interesting thought. I agree with you. The only thing that scares me is, like, I would definitely re-sign Carter. Reed makes me a little nervous because he's kind of undersized and he nearing 30. I worry about how his game's going to age because of like how much he depends on his athleticism. I think about some of the smaller corners who've been successful in the league, but a lot of them were like more physical guys. I think of like a Terrence Newman or somebody like that. Whereas Reed's more just like, he's like so sudden and he's so quick that I worry a little bit at how he's going to age. So that would be the only pause I'd have in giving all three a contract.
Right. I'm probably biased because when I see Reed, I see Aaron Glenn, and Aaron Glenn was very effective into his 30s. So you can't do that though. He's a different guy. To me, he's just like Aaron Glenn, and I'm going to pay him. But that's probably not the right way to go.
You may have convinced me, because I remember when they let Aaron Glenn go to Houston, who was that guy Beasley they brought in, who was just like a complete toast. I was like, yeah, maybe we should keep DJ. That was actually the right argument for me, because now I'm back to 2002 when they let him go to Houston in the expansion draft. They brought in these guys who couldn't play at all at corner, and the defense got torched that year. I recall. Maybe you're right about that. Maybe it's a sign of like the way the roster is built, and maybe it's a positive thing for the Jets. But I see a lot of trepidation about the safety position. I don't know. I just don't have it. I'd be more worried about the safety position if I wasn't so confident in the defensive line and the linebackers and the corners. As long as you have guys who can like function at all, I think the defense will be fine with these safeties.
I got no problem with the safeties. They're obviously not the greatest group in the league, but I don't see any huge weak spots. Tony Adams was fine. He wasn't great. He wasn't terrible. He was just he was okay, but that's good enough. And the thing is, he's so incredibly athletic that he's one guy who actually might develop. If he actually, learns football a little bit better, with those athletic gifts he has, he can actually become really good. Now, that doesn't mean he will. Development, like I said, most of the time these guys don't develop, but he has the potential to be a lot better. And Chuck Clark is enormously underrated, I think. Chuck Clark's a good player. So I got no problem with him. And Ashton Davis had a really good year last year, although he played more of a hybrid linebacker safety position. I think they're fine. They're solid. They're not great. They're not terrible. They're you have to have some guys in the team who aren't the best in the league. Nobody can afford to pay all the best in the league players. So yeah, I think it's fine. I think safe is fine.
Yeah, Chuck Clark was really good in Baltimore, and it was just kind of a numbers game because they had Hamilton and they had signed Marcus Williams, so there's nothing wrong with him. He didn't get traded because he was bad. He just got traded because they had too many safeties. They wanted to get something in return rather than spend a year where Clark's their number 4 safety and then they let him walk in free agency for nothing. That's the reason he got traded. So I think he's going to be really solid. I thought that was we will remove the Rodgers trade and all the complications from that, but granted, there's not a lot of competition. I thought that was the best move the Jets made last offseason was that trade for Clark, and
I love that move. Yeah,
competition like signing Lazard and signing Cobb, so I guess it's not that. But it was unfortunate because it was such a good move, and they just they couldn't benefit from it because he had suffered this freak injury during the offseason.
Right. Yeah, that's the question. Which is a question amongst many Jets players: is how does he come back from the injury? But if he's the same player, he's an upgrade over Jordan Whitehead as far as I'm concerned. He's a better player. So I love Chuck Clark. I think he's a good player, and if he comes back strong, we're fine.
Well, let's talk about Jets special teams. They bring back the punter Thomas Morstead, a friend of this show, who's been on the show a couple of times. They bring back Greg Zuerlein, and the punter is I'm happy Morstead's back because I think he's a good punter. I'm happy that the Jets have finally figured out how to do this kicker thing because Douglas. One of the most inexplicable things with Joe Douglas those first couple of years was how he handled kicker. Like everybody criticized him for letting Jason Myers go to Seattle. And my response to that is, first of all, Douglas wasn't the GM when Myers signed with Seattle. But second of all, it's like Seattle gave him this huge contract. And Myers had some really good years in Seattle, and they had a year that stunk, and he had a year that was okay. My whole thing is like they got Myers off that scrap heap. And they didn't. It wasn't that hard. It's not that hard to fill the kicker position, but Douglas kept bringing in these guys who just like were these huge leg guys who like couldn't kick. And I always said, like there are so many quality NFL kickers available at any point in time, and the guys who are proven. Why don't you just go get one of them? Well, he finally goes out and Greg Zuerlein a couple of years ago, and he's solid. And what do you know? Greg Zuerlein has a couple of good years, and he re-signs for a deal that's not crazy. I mean, what seems simple to me.
Yeah, it was extraordinary how bad the guys that Joe Douglas brought in one after another and it was almost impossible to do that poorly at the position, even just random throwing darts at a board of guys available. So yeah, it's nice to have a kicker you can rely on. Kickers for the most part are fungible. I think there are a few guys at the top of the league that are really terrific assets, but for the most part, most kickers, one guy's as good as the next. And it's hard to explain how bad Joe Douglas was at the kicker position, but he was.
That's the thing is like everybody always says, when a Pro Bowl kicker's about to hit free agency, everybody wants to give him a big contract. And the thing is, the guy's likely to regress the next year. And a guy who had a bad year is likely to have a great year next year. I mean, there's Justin Tucker, and maybe there's a couple other guys at the very top who like are worth the money. Like Adam Vinatieri back in his prime was worth a nice payday. They probably come up with a couple other guys, but like most kickers are just kind of like there's like this huge middle class, and I think it's more than 32 people, so every team should have a decent kicker because there's always a quality kicker who's available off the scrap heap who you can sign for nothing, and you just bring in a guy, and I think pretty much everybody outside of Tucker and again those top other guys are about as likely to have a good season as they are to have a bad season.
Yeah, that's right. To me, they're fungible. It's like one guy's the same as the next. It's other than the guys at the very top, and we don't have that guy, so don't pay the kicker a lot of money. But it shouldn't be that hard to find guys who are competent, not great, but competent, and yet we couldn't do it.
We did though, so let's praise Joe. We did, we re-signed him. He was good, and we re-signed him to a deal that wasn't crazy. So that's we're learning. Finally. We're learning. We're making progress. Yeah, so critical of Joe Douglas.
Finally, yes, he got it right.
Finally, give a little positive. give some credit. One of the things I've mentioned on this show frequently that I like, there's issues I have with the way the Jets construct their roster, but one of the things I do like is it does feel to me like they pay attention to special teams when they fill out, especially like that, maybe like the 44th, 45th, 46th spots on their roster. And I'm hoping that continues this year. Now they've let some guys go, like you remember how much I loved Delshon Phillips back in 2021, and then they let him go. And I've become a big Irv Charles fan because he plays well. But I just like that approach to the roster. I mean, I don't know whether some of these guys will stick. Maybe some of them will go this year. Maybe we'll lose my guy Irv Charles this year. But I think that's a good approach to roster building. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. The back end of the roster with, tight ends, wide receivers, running back, these guys have got to be able to play special teams. And you should probably emphasize that a lot more than some teams do. It's almost like it's just an afterthought. Well, anyone can go and do that. But I don't know if that's really true. And having good coverage teams makes a difference over the course of a season. That it doesn't show up in the box score much. People don't talk about it much. But, yeah, it makes a difference.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you have a breakout player you have hopes for the Jets this year?
Will McDonald. I think Will McDonald's going to have a big year. I know nobody's talking about him. I think he's going to have a big year. I think he's going to get maybe 40% of the snaps. He's going to have double-digit sacks. That's my prediction. We'll see.
I like that. I like that prediction. So how many double-digit sack guys do you think the Jets are going to have?
2. Will McDonald, Hassan Reddick. That's it. I don't think Quinn is going to do it again. He could. Quinn could do it any year, but it's hard to do it at the defensive tackle position. These guys fluctuate pretty broadly there, and he gets double teamed all the time. So he'll be just the same Quinn Williams as he always is, but it's hard to get double-digit sacks for him.
It's one of the things I always say when people criticize defensive tackles, because we have a lot of defensive tackles who are highly drafted with the Jets. Like, look at Fletcher Cox's career. Look at his sack totals. Like, it's tough to put up sacks from that spot. Yeah, very tough. And since he gets double teamed all the time, he could do it. Absolutely could, but I don't expect him to. Let me ask you this. My maybe biggest concern with this Jets team is the coaching, because I feel like, there are a lot of teams that have talent, but I worry about this Jets team going up against Kansas City or Baltimore, even Cincinnati. I mean, I've been very unimpressed by the job Saleh has done. I did not think he really handled the adversity well last year. I thought the team did not respond on his watch. I mean, Hackett's a whole nother thing. I mean, I think the coaching staff, I'll put it in a glasses half full perspective. I think this coaching staff has a lot to prove this year.
On the offensive side, for sure. The defensive side, just the coaching staff, I think, has done a good job. I guess I'm a little bit less concerned about coaching, not because the Jets have good coaches on the offensive side, but because I think the talent trumps coaching. I think the talent is more important, a lot more important. I think good coaches are basically almost universally, they're great coaches because they have great quarterbacks. If you don't have a great quarterback, suddenly you're not a great coach anymore, Look, Hackett's a problem, huge problem. But is Aaron Rodgers really the offensive coordinator? Probably. So does it matter that much? I don't know. Maybe it matters when you have Zach Wilson at quarterback. Does it matter when you have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback? I'm not sure. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. I think talent trumps coaching. So yes, on the offensive side of the ball, we have coaching problems. Does it matter as much as some people say? I don't think so. I think if the talent shines through, the coaching will be good enough.
I think if your goal is to make the playoffs, I agree. But I mean, I think like the best teams in the league, they have talent and they have coaching. So that's really my concern is like when I compare the Jets to because the Jets have big dreams. The Jets want to do big things this year. That's what I say more than anything. Look, obviously Hackett's gonna be less of an issue with Rodgers than he was with Zach Wilson. But I guess one of the things I think about is, obviously with Rodgers a quarterback, the offense is going to run a lot better. Hackett's going to be less of an issue. But part of my problem is just, other teams, they may have a great quarterback, but they also have a coach who's like adding to that. Andy Reid adds to Kansas City's got the best quarterback in the league, but their coach makes him better. Cincinnati, Zach Taylor's not on that level, but I think he helps Burrow out. Whereas Hackett's a guy who I think is hired to watch Austin Powers movies with Rodgers when they stays over. So I guess that's my issue. That's my concern.
Here's when I stopped thinking coaches matter that much is now I can't think of his name. Geez, the guy from Oklahoma University that took over the Cowboys.
Switzer.
There you go. Terrible coach, and the Cowboys won a Super Bowl with him. At that point, I mean, the Cowboys were supremely talented, of course, but at that point, I kind of lost faith in the idea that coaches are the ones who are carrying the team. I just don't think they are. I think the talent carries the team and can win a Super Bowl without a good coach. So not to say that coaches don't matter at all. Of course they do. And of course, the Jets are at a disadvantage on offense. There's no question about it. But if the Jets stay healthy, and that's a huge if, then I think they're as good as anybody. I think they can win it all. But that's a huge if. There's just so many older players who are now injury question marks that it's just, I don't know, too many moving parts.
All right, that's the final word, MacGregor. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks. Always a pleasure, John. Always nice talking to you.
Well, that's all for our episode today. Thanks so much to my friend MacGregor Wells for joining us this week. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back next week to talk more Jets.